Please.
So I'm still unmuted. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for a day that went very quickly, I think. And you can see people have been entering things into HackMD and Mural, so it looks like things are coming out. I wonder if it's good to go around each of the groups, just a quick feedback on what kind of things were being discussed, if there's a plan for tomorrow. If there are people who aren't here that you'd like some representation from, I can make a list and we can go to our little black books and see if we can find people to come in for half an hour discussion. If that's helpful on some of these topics, we can do that. So why don't team one, Chris, do you have somebody, or are you going to talk to it?
I'll talk to this one. I'm on the grounds that today's the first day, but in general it won't be me.
Good. Very good.
We'll do the usual. Hang on. Go away. Right. So team one is looking at the kind of building aspect of the HE coming out of lockdown, which actually very, very closely related to anything to do with teaching. So we had a long kind of general discussion, which ended up breaking down to looking at three kind of different things. So the first one was largely connected with sort of scheduling issues. So on the grounds that when you move students around, that's when you can have problems to do with risk of infection or just generally coming close to each other. So that first group is tasked with looking at what are the issues of trying to, can you minimize the movement? What are the issues to do with that? Whether we can teach students in batches to reduce that, and what's the merits of large group versus small groups, and long time of interaction versus short time, and trying to think of the various causes for movement on the campus and the various ways that movement can occur, and try to think of the activity which is most likely to cause movement and risk activity, and think of ways that having groups that will kind of reduce this as much as possible, whilst all the time thinking of staff risk. So this is kind of the scheduling stuff. It turns out there has been quite a bit of thought done. The group identified some literature produced by the University of Oregon, the University of California, and they're going to kind of have a look at this in terms of trying to understand the impact of movement and viral load on that. So that was task one. Task two, we had to think about the trade-off between risk and student experience. So clearly you can completely reduce the risk to students by never having them on campus at all, and preferably banning the staff, which is kind of where we are at the moment. This is not what we want to continue. Certain university, which I will not identify, is planning on having the students on campus for 3 hours a week. How good is that? So in that sense, we're trying to identify various aspects of the student experience. So in terms of kind of aspects of learning which are least affected by not being face-to-face, you have assessments, less than lectures, less than tutorials, less than labs or medical training and stuff like that. And we also kind of considered what is a reasonable size to actually give a good student experience, and came up with a number of about 6 as being small enough to be safe, but large enough to develop a cohort. So that's going to try and put some numbers to that for modelling. And then the third group is kind of all to do with flow. So they're looking at things like modelling entrance and exit into a lecture theatre, whether that should be ordered or random, considering how long it takes, or what's the optimal way of getting into a theatre which takes up the least of time, but has the minimal impact on timetable, and different types of room, and trying to think whether something like what we call a red or green card, so a process where when a student's finished with sitting in a place, they identify that they've been there, so the next student doesn't sit in the same place. So that's kind of almost a fluid mechanics type problem, thinking of the flow of people as a fluid moving in and out of the lecture theatres. So that's our 3 tasks, and we'll carry on tomorrow reading some stuff and doing some more modelling on that.
So you have these groups already established, ready for?
Well, loosely, we might move them around a bit, but we broke into 3 working parties for about 45 minutes to kind of put some more flesh on the bones, having had a whole discussion.
Very good. And okay, and these problems relate to the chief operating officer level challenges and the registrar challenges, would you say?
Well, I mean, you've got. I'll just go back. We've got scheduling issues up here. Quite significant scheduling. You know, trying to make a decision. How long is a student allowed to spend on campus? Issue, which goes up to COO. And then, yeah, how do you structure going in and out of your theatres?
Very good.
Gemma's been our source of wisdom on many of these things.
Excellent. Good. Any questions for Chris's team? Or Chris, do you need anybody from any other team or anybody else in tomorrow who perhaps isn't represented?
Not sure at the moment. I might let you know tomorrow when we thought a bit more.
Very good. Okay.
If there's anyone that's a great expert in modelling crowds, I could always use them.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Chris. Group 2, Lars, I think this was with you, wasn't it? Are you happy to talk to this briefly?
Yeah, but also Martin. We split into 2 groups, and I think, Martin, it's easier if you start because you were the first group. You are muted, sorry.
I'm just going to nominate Jessica to take us through.
Okay, good.
Sure. Let me bring the mural back up. Right, so we were talking about this notion of student bubbles. And we spent a lot of time kind of trying to get our heads around the limitations of these and where and when it's possible and what sort of complications might be involved or assumptions we might have to make to get started. So the first and perhaps the biggest one is that we wanted to talk mainly about students who are in university housing, because I think we had trouble getting our heads around how you could sensibly talk about bubbles of students when they shared households with people who were outside of the university system and might be in other bubbles. So to start with, that's I think what we were mainly talking about. This is sort of fundamentally a university specific question. We did note a couple of the things that made it especially unusual. Let's see, we were looking at how it links with other groups. We wanted to kind of note the difference between what we might call a city university that is not separated from a wider population, or a campus university, and how these are different. But with the caveat that of course, I'm sure that even at campus universities, it's very common for students to go off campus, for example, to a nightclub for a night out, or into the city for grocery shopping, this sort of thing. With all of the many assumptions and caveats, which we have got a bunch of on the mural board, we still, I think, managed to establish a couple questions we're interested in working on. Those mostly go along with designing bubble schemes. Especially, we were fascinated by the idea of nested bubble schemes, where perhaps you would bubble students together in a smaller group with people on their same course, say 15 students in a group. But then when prevalence was really low, you might have a nested bubble system where several of those 15-person bubbles could kind of union together into a larger group, which wouldn't necessarily align by course, and kind of how and when to design that, and how and when to move up to a higher bubble level versus lock down to a lower bubble level, depending on prevalence and testing regimes. How much as well do you have to test? How frequently to kind of interface with this system? I think that's a whistle-stop tour of the mural. Anything to add? There were we were lucky to have some people who were kind of already working on this problem in our group, and that helped a lot. So if any of them would like to pipe up with anything I've forgotten, please.
Very good. I can't see anybody unmuting themselves, so I think you've probably covered that,
That's
Jess.
it from us then.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Lars and Martine, is this over to you?
Yeah, so the second group was more about the question of flow around campus. So how do people move around? And one thing that we identified as a maybe tractable question was the question how this interacts also with scheduling. So can we stagger starting and end times of classes, whatever, so that people don't interact on campus if they shouldn't? That's essentially so having a mathematical model of how do people move around on campus and how does this interact with the schedule is sort of the question that we wanted to work on.
Are there any links with what Group 1 are doing?
I think we are on a slightly different level, as we don't sort of model what happens inside the building. We assume everybody has moved out in a sort of regular fashion.
Okay.
But I think you could try to use this also. It might adapt to something once you are out of the room, how people move inside the building. Probably the models would work for that as well. But we thought more about really the movement on campus as sort of the idea. We think we only will be thinking and working on toy models, so we don't have any specific data requirements at the moment.
Very good. So you've got 2 subgroups ready to start on this tomorrow.
Yeah. If people want to look at how we want to think about it in more detail, you can look at the HackMD of the group 2. There you'll find stuff.
And you're both based on the Starship Enterprise, looking at your groups?
Apparently. I think mostly the second group is based on the Starship Enterprise.
Fantastic. Good.
Good. Thanks.
Thanks, Lars, Jessica, and Martine. And finally, Group 3. Ed, is this one with you?
Sure. So we focused in the end on 2 topics. One is transport. So we're not really sure whether the problem is the infection opportunity that sharing public transport affords, or whether it is simply the problem that several of this morning's speakers mentioned about whether there will be enough capacity to meet the demand, given the reduced capacity of the existing services. We decided we would take a closer look at transport tomorrow morning, but Alex Diaz has found a good snapshot of a week's worth of national public transport use from October, which we're hoping to find useful. So the second topic is really the one of how connected university communities are to their surrounding communities, taken as a whole. A lot of the existing epidemiological work is based on 2 or 3 data sets, none of which are particularly relevant to this problem. So I think the best we can do is a sort of schematic contact network where we draw out the kind of contacts that exist without being able to put weights on those edges. But it's important to be able to illustrate how quickly an outbreak on a university campus would spread to the surrounding community. And a question that goes with that is, how quickly will the university leadership and local healthcare authorities be able to detect an outbreak occurring? And how much testing is feasible and how much testing actually is required in order to do that? We've been looking at a number of the papers in the recent literature about several of these problems. There's one by Gressman and Peck, which is called Simulating COVID-19 in a University Environment, and it very explicitly treats a university as being a closed system. And one of the things they say is it's extremely important that students refrain from all contact outside of academic and residential settings. And that's directly at odds with some of the things that we heard this morning, particularly from Amanda Chetwynd, who was talking about student experience. So I think there is perhaps a mismatch between what the science is currently saying about what will be possible and what the people we heard from this morning are expecting to happen. And as you might expect, we had quite a lot of discussion about ethics and social responsibility in our group, because we had Maurice Kyodo with us. And the social responsibility aspect does rely on understanding how the virus can spread from universities out to the surrounding community. So I think those are the two topics that we're planning to work on.
Very good. And do you have any requests for help on the transport one, if that's kicking off tomorrow?
If we could talk to someone from TfL, that would be very useful.
Yeah, Chris, I think you also potentially had someone you may be able to bring in.
It was first bus, wasn't it, Chris?
First bus, yeah. I mean, I did have a chat with them, so I can fill you in on some of the issues if that will help.
I mean, making a preliminary list of what the transport situation is at different universities that we know around the country.
Mine is very, very Bath specific, but
it's clear that the problem varies hugely from university to university.
Yeah.
Good, fantastic. So there's 2 groups set up, ready to work on that one as well. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Ed, and everybody, for filling us all in. Do we have any questions? I can tell people what's going to be happening tomorrow. So what we've done in the previous study groups is we've started at, what time have I said?
9:30, I think you said.
Started at, 9:30 for 10. So 9:30 was really just a way of getting people into the group, have a cup of tea in the main session. People can join that if they like, but it's just nice to bring people in at the same time. And then we'll put people into their groups for 10 o'clock. There is a seminar. Chris, have you sent something around, or do you want us to send something around?
Hang on, I'll put it in the chat right now.
Okay, very good. So this is... Let me find it.
It should be coming out now. There you go. So that's the Zoom details. It says 12:30 there. That's only, I'll have the room open from 12:30. The seminar's actually at 1:15.
Just remind us what this is, Chris.
So this is a seminar. It's our regular applied math seminar at Bath, but it just happens that this week it's by the RAMP team that's looking at aerosols. So they set up a RAMP team looking at aerosols and surface contamination. And it's a subset of that team is doing a presentation about aerosols and surface contamination. So it's highly relevant to many of the issues that we're interested in.
Very good.
And if we 1:15 to 2:15.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for that, Chris. So,
Tina's put up the title.
Brilliant. So, other than that, there's no other structure that we're putting on top of it, and it will be for individual groups to structure their time as they see fit. Are there any other questions or comments, or should we let people get off what has been a long...
Can I just ask Matt,
yes.
Can I ask the groups if they had some useful conversations this morning with the sort of stakeholders, the problem holders, so that you're both doing things which are interesting mathematically as well as related specifically to some of the unique points that we can get out of this particular scenario modeling?
Oh, well, certainly our group, we had a lot of input on that front.
So I think some were available, Dave, throughout the day. Not everybody, obviously. And again, if people do want individuals brought back in, I think pretty much everybody has said they will try and make some time over the next few days to touch base. So do ask us to arrange that, and we can do it.
Matt?
Yes, Nick.
Hi. Just a quick query offer for thought. One of the things we might be able to do is some visualizations. If people have some ideas for visualizations, perhaps they can bring them along tomorrow. And if you've got dummy data sets, that might be worth looking at as well.
So that's a great idea. So is this something that perhaps people can have a think about for tomorrow morning, with just some vague ideas of, this is the kind of thing that this modelling might come out with. how can we think about visualizing this in a way that's useful for people who perhaps don't have a mathematical background? Is that the kind of request that you'd find valuable?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
You don't have to, but if there is some thoughts, yeah, let us know.
I'm sure that would be really valuable. Thank you, Nick, for that offer. Any other comments?
Can I just make a couple of sort of quick observations and suggestions before the end of the day? Firstly, I realize that we've all just gotten together to get today and there hasn't been much time, but I do urge everyone to try and read through the document I prepared on how to go about the modeling in a way that takes into account more than the mathematics that we're working with. I can't stress this enough, that there are some really important issues that I'm kind of feeling are still being glossed over a little bit. So please read that before we get together again tomorrow. Secondly, I can already see that siloing is becoming a bit of an issue here. And I urge the teams to start doing a bit more mixing. You've got one team working on people inside lecture theatres, another team working on people flowing around and into lecture theatres. You should have members of your team switching to be able to figure out what the other side are doing, so that these solutions actually match up nicely. You also might be missing out on some interesting observations. The team number 2, the bubbling team, was talking about, oh, you know, can we really get the bubbling working, or can't we? And team 3 was talking about, well, there's a paper about doing contact tracing where you do the contacts of contacts, but that gets too big in normal society. But you might have a hybrid solution of bubbles plus 2 degrees of contact separation, contact tracing might actually be feasible within the university system. And you're missing this stuff because you've got separate teams who aren't talking to each other. So I do urge the teams to have a bit more motion between them, so that the interface between the sort of room level, university level, society level is more clear, and to not miss good ideas. And finally, it's important to realize that the stakeholders have asked us to solve certain problems. They may have essentially been asking us to turn lead into gold, and it might not be possible to do some of the things they've asked us, and thus we should be ready to produce solutions that say, no, this isn't going to work, and we can give you a convincing argument as to why it's not going to work. It's not up to us to do the impossible and to make a square peg fit in the round hole. If it is the case that we can show that these various solutions or requests by the stakeholders are just completely infeasible, then we should not be afraid to tell them that, so they can at least not waste their time on them anymore and go and try and do something a bit more productive. Matt, you're muted.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Maurice. It's great to have those and have that document available. It is, as you say, available in the repository, and do keep flagging up things that you think we can be doing better. If we can move people around, that would be great. Just conscious.
Matt, can I just ask, is it possible for everybody to see the other groups' murals?
It is indeed, yes. So why don't I send this around in an email tonight so everyone can see everything that everyone's been doing.
The
Yeah,
HackMDs as well.
sorry?
And the HackMDs as well.
Yeah, I'll send around. I'll send around those. I'll send around the mural, the hacking.
Yeah, let's do that.
See what's being discussed. Good.
And of course, we'll have tomorrow, first thing, 9:30 to 10, to generally discuss what we're thinking about as well in an informal way. Yeah,
exactly. And if people want to move, as Maurice says,
yeah, absolutely.
we might encourage movement. It's not always hugely easy in a virtual environment, but we should encourage it. Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Reconvene around 9:30 for 10 o'clock tomorrow. Yeah, have a good evening. Thank you all very much for a solid day's work on Zoom. It's not always fun, but I think you guys have made it a successful first day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Claire, is there anything you need from me for tomorrow?
I don't think so. You're gonna email everybody.
I'm going to email everybody. Chris, I'll include your link to the.
Yes, please. Yeah, it's fantastic. And yeah, fine. Did you want us to have a sort of organisers meeting a little bit before 9:30, or do you think we'll just go for it?
I think just go for it. We can
Okay.
do that in public.
Yeah.
I
Well,
feel like this isn't like the Department of Health one where, you know, it was all quite new. We
no. Well, yeah.
think we know what we're doing.
Well, I don't know about that, but
A little bit.
that'll be a bit of a stretch. I always like the famous remark about a study group, which was a group of mathematicians diverging towards a solution.
You know who said that, Chris?
Well, it wasn't you, was it?
No,
It sounds like Alan Champneys, I think. It was at the Bristol study group, certainly.
Do you feel like you're missing out not having what were they, Coleman balls? Coleman balls.
No, you don't get them so much in a virtual environment. Right, I'm going to disappear because I've got to go to Canada now.
Oh, Chris, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
supposed to be in Canada today at a conference, so they're having it virtually.
I've just remembered, so I'm not available, and I was hoping Jane would be here. I'm not
Yeah,
available.
but I've asked and she said she'll chair that
Okay,
bit tomorrow.
great.
Yeah.
I'm gone from about 3 till 5 tomorrow, talking to someone about food. So if Jane can do this bit, that would be great.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, see you tomorrow then.
Right, see you tomorrow.